Nambiar and Mr. Raj K. Purohit to come up on the dais. I'll introduce them. Lord Meghnad Desai, Vijay Nambiar and Mr. Raj K. Purohit. Lord Meghnad Desai has already addressed this session once, we all know. He's a think tank and an institution by himself. He's a famous development economist, active labor politician, associated with a number of prestigious organizations, serving as columnist of a number of reputed papers, writer of internationally acclaimed books. Desai is one of the best economists and writers of the world today, and surely the four-ranking one among the people of Indian origin. He is now based out of London. We have Vijay Nambiar addressing us first time in this program today, currently the Chief of Staff at the United Nations and Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General. The United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon announced on 1st January 2007 the appointment of Vijay Nambiar of India as his Chief of Staff. Mr. Nambiar had been serving as Special Advisor to Secretary General Kofi Annan at the rank of Under Secretary General earlier. Mr. Nambiar previously served as Deputy National Security Advisor to the Government of India and Head of the National Security Council Secretariat. And we also have Raj K. Purohit, currently the President of Bharatiya Janata Party in Mumbai, and a person who is into the think tank of the oppositional politics in the state of, in the country of India. So, without any further ado, I request our respected Lord Meghnad Desai to make the initial comments, to put his point of view. Hope that in this session we can take a few questions, because I'm sure those who are present here are interested to have an interaction with the three gentlemen and not just hear lectures. So over to Lord Meghnad Desai.
Thank you for that, and I'll try and not wake you up if I can help it. I know you've been through a very rough night last night. I want to confine my remarks to a very simple but rather important question. Has the Indian miracle ended? Is it the case that after having had in the first decade of 21st century, various Western journalists and even some NRIs writing books about the Indian miracle, Incredible India, delving through the history and about snake charmers and elephant rides and all that, the world was being told that there was this new India, that India was a miracle country, that it had overcome all its past inhibitions, and India was part of BRIC, or India was an emerging country, or was going to be a superpower by 2015, 2020, whatever it is. Now, obviously, in the last 2-3 years, there has been a substantial reversal of those expectations. Indian economy has slowed down. We are now looking at 5.5% growth rate rather than 9% or double-digit growth rate. And in a sense, there has been a feeling of policy paralysis, not in the last week or so, but policy paralysis, and more than policy paralysis, corruption. It's not that India was ever not a corrupt country, but especially the whole series of scams, CWG and 2G and now Colgate and some various other things, has made people worry more than they usually have worried about corruption in India. And the fact that there is a very large middle class movement that Anna Hazare inspired, especially last year if anybody was there, the crowd which gathered in Jantar Mantar and the sort of the agitation, the momentum that Anna Hazare built up first in last April 2011, and in August. Made people think like, is this a whole new movement? Time magazine and various people began to take notice. This year there has not been that big a movement, either by Anna Hazare or by Baba Ramdev, but there has been a lot of unease, and we have seen in all the major newspapers, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, Economist, Time Magazine, Washington Post, all of them are beginning to write India off. So the question is, what's going on? Is that, one first question is, how much of the miracle that India achieved was because of policy-induced dynamism by the government, and how much was it because of what the private sector did? What was those two? And especially for a diaspora audience, one of the most important things about diaspora is that whatever India's growth rate was over the last 50 years, the diaspora has always been successful. And the success of the diaspora basically refuted the idea that there's something about culture or values that the Indians had which were preventing them from being growth oriented or being risk takers or being profit makers. Every Indian story of abroad, South Africa, the Caribbean, Malaysia, wherever, California, wherever, it's a success story, by and large. So one has to say, well, what do they have? What do they have abroad that they don't have at home? Well, the question is, what do they don't have abroad, which they have at home? It's the government. The Indian government, they don't have abroad, but they have it at home. And is the Indian government a part of the problem? And again, between 1991 and for a while, it looked like we had a functioning government or a non-interfering government. And now, are we back to square one? So I think one of the most important questions is that, is there a bottom to the Indian growth rate? Or have we reached the bottom at 5.5? Could it go down further? Could it go down 3.5? Or, and is it something? Now, the crucial question, obviously, Mr. Purohit will speak from his own perspective of the leading opposition party. But one problem one has to say is that there is a problem that politics in general in India, across all parties, shows no interest in economic efficiency. There's not a single party which stands for a balanced budget, no party which stands for efficiency in the public sector employment or good delivery. All parties stand for spending more money, what they call inclusive growth. But the idea is that whatever may happen, the important thing for a party is to offer food grain at 3 rupees per kilo, or free television sets, or free mobile sets, or like that. And this is not a party fund, this is what everybody does. And so the perspective of Indian political parties is populist. And it is entirely related to the government as a kamadhenu, and gives people expectations that government is kamadhenu, and then there are no budget restrictions. Money grows on trees. For a while, it didn't really matter because the growth was generating the revenue, which was financing the public expenditure. And then, of course, people got carried away. They were creating entitlements which are irreversible and which are hugely expensive. And if the growth slows down, you won't be able to cut the entitlements, but you'll have. We noticed it with the diesel price policy, or petrol price. I'm one of the few people who goes on television, shouting at Arnab Goswami, and defends petrol price rise. Because they say, but what about the Aam Aadmi? I think the Aam Aadmi doesn't drive cars. Forget it. What is it? Is everybody in Aam Aadmi? Whenever it comes to subsidy, it's always the Aam Aadmi. The government subsidies are indiscriminate across income levels. And we can't go on saying everybody deserves a subsidy in the world. Eventually, those subsidies are paid for somewhere else in the system. That's what economists know about. So, in things like diesel price or petrol price or procurement price, water subsidy, fertilizer subsidy, power subsidy, there's indiscriminate preference for subsidy across all parties. And if for some reason this is now costing economic growth to the government, to the country, one has to ask two questions. What is the worst that can happen? And how can it get better? Now, I don't know how much time are you giving me? How many more minutes are you giving me?
20, 25 minutes.
Wow.
Total.
Okay.
Of which half is gone.
Okay. I think that the best prospect one can think about right now in 2014 is that there will be a large-scale coalition government. It will be either third parties or either NDA or UPA, whoever it is, but it will not be a strong government. All the polls show that BJP may get maybe 140 to 150 seats, Congress will get 120 to 125 seats, and the rest are sort of, small parties. And people say, oh, Nitish Kumar may become Prime Minister, or Narendra Modi may become Prime Minister, or Rahul Gandhi. Whoever becomes Prime Minister doesn't matter. It will be a coalition of many parties. And a coalition of many parties cannot offer strong government, period. And therefore, we may not actually get much joy in terms of a strong reforming government in what another government to come. So the question is, what is it that people, business people, ought to be asking for in a world like this? And I think what business people ought to be asking for is that somehow or other, governments ought to be disciplined in terms of deficit. Because now individual states in India have followed the financial management or whatever the act is called, and they have successfully tackled the problem of budget deficits. When you go to Bihar, Bihar runs a balance, but Bihar actually runs a surplus on its budget. And by and large, states have become very irresponsible. The center is irresponsible. So how can one actually insist that the center will at least, we may not be able to choose what they spend the money on, but at least they won't spend more money than they have. How can business groups insist that budgetary discipline be satisfied? Now let me give you a shocking statistic, which I'm the only person who is shocked by it, so nobody else takes notice. The largest item of expenditure in India at the center, 33% of total revenue, is interest on debt. Nobody even talks about this, thing. The fact that India pays 33% of its total revenue of interest on accumulated debt, and not a single person is worried about that. In UK, when it got to 10%, we were all complaining like man, and Gordon Brown reduced it for a while. Now, it is a shocking thing that there is nothing being done about this. There are public sector enterprises sitting on a lot of surplus cash, and there's government borrowing money, and I think that it doesn't make any sense. And maybe someday somebody, and the business people ought to be able to point out that this is a very irrational way of running a government. If you think of, let's call it Bharat Public Limited. Bharat Public Limited, all the public owned enterprises, together with the government, is in surplus. Bharat as a government budget is in deficit. And it doesn't make sense. You should run a company like this. You should, that's one thing. And I think then, if that is a minimum thing which can be done, then one could almost say that the inflationary impact of budget deficits will not be there. The Reserve Bank of India has already said that they will only cut interest rates if the government gets deficit, shows some sign of getting deficit under control. Quite rightly so. If inflation comes down, then there would be a greater relief for the people. And then investment may revive. Right now, investment is not reviving because households are pretty hard up. Households are dipping into their savings in order to finance their annual expenditure. The saving rate is dropped from 35 to 30. Okay, so what we have to get our antenna to is how to convey messages to the government, popularly elected, India is a great democracy and all that. But because the political parties are economically irresponsible, I put it that way, we have to make them responsible. And if that is satisfied, then I think it may be possible for India to hold the growth rate at around 5.5% to 6%. More than that would require active policy. More than it would require serious active consideration about infrastructure investments, of, rationalizing various obstacles to investment, improving convertibility, capital account convertibility, and things like that. Those are technical things. But I think one can arrest the decline at 5.5 if we can persuade the political system to be fiscally responsible. If it is not fiscally responsible, it's quite likely they will not listen. Then I think there's a serious danger that a lot of good Indian capital will go abroad. It's already doing that. So the larger business people are going abroad. Nothing wrong with it. Why shouldn't Indian business be global? But more will go global, because there is no point in investing money if you're going to be in a corrupt system. So let me kind of just sum up on this. I think India's economic problem is its politics. Politics is not beyond cure, and I think if we are modest in our ambitions, that we cannot actually we cannot actually either predict or influence the outcome of how people will vote. That is a democratic process. Given that that is a democratic process, what is the minimum that the civil society or the business can do to get people aligned? And I think also, very minimalist. We can't actually fight governments about what subsidies they should give or not give. That's very much a political issue, and governments will decide, parties will decide, who they want to bribe to get elected. Well, that is democracy. But what we might be able to persuade them, and perhaps even abide by the legislation they have passed themselves, is to be able to be fiscally more responsible. I think if that modest aim is realized, one can be cautiously optimistic that incredible India is not totally lost. It may be retrievable. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Desai. Substantial reversal of the Indian growth story due to policy paralysis and corruption. Sounding the ringing bell there. Policy-induced dynamism is lacking, and whatever has happened is because of the private sector entrepreneurship-induced dynamism. A major observation. And he has also congratulated the diaspora for being successful across the world, irrespective of the situation back in India. And he has also found problems with the freebie politics of populism. We all know, not only at the center, at very many states as well, how elections have been won on the promises of television sets and all that, 2 rupees kilo rice and all. Large-scale coalition, even he is presuming that it will be large-scale coalition in 2014, unless there is major change in the tectonic change in the political situation, on which we'll hope Raj K. Purohit can throw his point of view. A very significant point that Lord Desai has made at the end, towards the end, 33% of revenue goes for interest in debt. That's phenomenal. 1/3 of the income of the country is only for debt management, is really shocking. And what he suggests is to run a nation-like coalition, like a company. I'm not completely sure, maybe in the question-answer session he can say how fiscal irresponsibility can be turned into a reasonable responsibility within the 2 years remaining of this government, 1.5 years remaining. But that's a very short period to really come out of this scenario of 33% revenue interest. So we'll look into that in the discussion time. Controlling inflation, less fiscal irresponsibility, and towards active policy. This is the only way to bring back the growth story. We'll go to the next speaker, Vijay Nambiar, currently the Chief of Staff of the United Nations and Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General. Mr. Nambiar, please.
That was a bravura performance and very predictable from Lord Meghnad Desai. In some ways, I think his comment on the politics of growth in India will be followed also by Purohitji with a similar comment on politics in India, focusing on the government. I thought between these two kebabs, I'll be a bit of a huddy and speak not so much about the government, but about the corporate sector and the private sector in terms of the UN. As an international civil servant, one has been increasingly conscious of the way in which business has been increasingly involved with the United Nations and multilateralism. The UN is no longer, in a sense, just a meeting ground for governments. It is increasingly reaching out to business, and business is being involved in many of the bigger issues which the United Nations has been involved in. I thought that I'd probably just make 3 points. One is that from the viewpoint of the United Nations, the business sector is more and more, in fact, even the private sector is increasingly playing an important role in our complex and interdependent world. And in recognition of this reality, the UN has begun to involve business more and more directly in its deliberations. And of course, to say that Indian business on its part is playing an important role in measuring up to this. And I wanted to just perhaps not sound so, certainly from Indian business point of view, there are some very active initiatives which are being taken. In June this year, in the Rio +20 meeting, the governments of the world got together to address the issue of sustainable development. The challenge before them was to define a path of inclusive green economy and to lift millions of people from poverty, protect the global environment, define sustainable development goals, and of course reaffirm past commitments which governments had made. But there were really two tracks in Rio. One was the government track and the other was the business track. And in fact, when in his speech, the Secretary General had talked about new commitments. He called for a new model of sustainability. And he said that we must recognize that the old model of development and social advancement is broken. And let us not forget that the scarcest resource of all is time. In some ways, but business has measured up because there was a separate, along with the intergovernmental meeting, there was what they call a corporate sustainability forum, which was organized as a platform for business during that time. And at that forum, business leaders, stock exchanges, and companies set themselves sustainability goals. One of the participants of that business forum, Mr. Chris Gopalakrishnan, the co-chair of Infosys, had mentioned that business has been most of the main contributors to causing environmental damage, inducing social inequity, increasingly unsustainable consumption, and promoting unjustifiable lifestyle. Therefore, business should take the lead to resolve them. Not on its own terms, but also in partnership with government, civil society, and the people in general. Now, thousands of companies have actually joined the what they call the Global Compact, which has been actually since 2004. There's been the UN Global Compact has been taking almost 7,000 corporate signatories in 150 countries, driving innovation and at the same time addressing issues like climate change in a responsible manner. The Global Compact in India was actually launched in December 2000, and today comprises about 100 leading organizations. Recently, in fact, there were two, I'd like to make just 2 points about two experiments which have, in a sense, shown the way in which Indian business has reacted to the question of corporate sustainability. One is Unilever has developed what is called a Pural solution, a domestic non-electric water purifier that delivers clean drinking water in a cost-effective manner. It also has reduced tremendously the incidence of waterborne diseases. This product innovation has been pushed today into developed markets also. Sustainability-based innovation, therefore, has actually been introduced in a manner which is truly realistic in terms of addressing the problems of the people, and is now, in a sense, a business model, an innovation model which can be brought to scale elsewhere in the world also. The second one is Mahindra & Mahindra has developed an initiative called Spark the Rise. This was launched as an online platform for ordinary citizens to drive, ordinary people to drive positive change among rural communities in India. Participants suggest ideas related to technology, infrastructure, transportation, energy, rural development, social entrepreneurship, all kinds of things. And every month, one idea is chosen, and then they're supposed to, the Mahindra & Mahindra finances this particular idea in order to bring it into implementation, if necessary, to scale. Now this therefore leverages both the internet penetration and the mobile phone penetration in India. These are kinds of initiatives by which the corporations have been able to show, on the one hand, their ability to reach out to rural communities and address basic problems of sustainability and problems of affecting rural communities. And I think in that sense, what the UN has over the years been projecting of the Millennium Development Goals and now the Sustainable Development Goals are now being pushed not just by governments but also by the private sector. And I think increasingly smaller and smaller companies are bringing this into their own sort of corporate vision statements, and I think that is the sign of the changes that are taking place in countries like India, Brazil, South Africa, etc. This perhaps, in some ways, in Rio, they talked about what they call differentiated, the common but differentiated responsibilities. There are developing countries will continue to make the broader political arguments relating to not being placed on an equal scale with the developed countries, but they are already beginning to take the message and they are moving in the direction of building independent trajectories for sustainable development. And I think that is perhaps the most exciting way in which business in the developing world is responding to the challenge of sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nambiar. He focused on a totally different area, how on the United Nations platform, increasingly, the business communities are also making a difference, making an impact, how UN is increasingly reaching out to business, and the private sector is playing more important role increasingly in the social arena as well at the global level. Active initiatives by Indian business in global affairs within and beyond UN, so a lot of examples given, and also for sustainable growth. Undoubtedly today, CSR is one of the, not just a catchword, but becoming an increasing practice across the world. 1% policy in Japan makes every company contribute 1% of their entire revenue in CSR work. Several chambers of commerce in India have taken up the policy of 2% of the profit to be given for CSR. I think that's a trend for the future. We'll move to the last speaker for this session, Mr. Raj K. Purohit, currently the President of Bharatiya Janata Party. We'd look forward to, from him, not just the criticism of the government, which has been very well placed by Lord Desai, but an alternative blueprint, an alternative plan of how things can be set right if BJP comes to power.
It is very difficult to change habits. Sanmaniya Lord Desai, Sanmaniya Nambiar sir, हमारे कॉन्फ्रेंस के चेयरमैन विजय नाटा जी, कांचन बनर्जी, उज्ज्वल जी चौधरी, यहाँ पर उपस्थित सभी मित्रों, वैसे मेरी बहुत सारी विषय को देसाई साहब ने टच किया है, लॉर्ड देसाई। I have heard so many speeches in the last 2 days, and myself I am impressed with their speeches and the deep thought they have given to the subjects. Before I start my things, I say, Mr. Ujjwala said 15 minutes. तो ujjwala ji, आपको मालूम है मेरा तो बोलने का ही धंधा है. If I get mic, no. One politician dies. In Indian tradition, you put atta, lot of flours, dal, masala. So उसके बेड में, वो politician के बेड में ये सब सामान रख गया. Suddenly politician एक बार जिंदा हो गया. बेवकूफ बेटे, तुझे मालूम नहीं? मैं आटे का वहाँ क्या करूँगा? मेरे माइक साथ में रख, मैं वहाँ जाके भी भाषण दूँगा बोले. अभी Lord Desai have said, our politician, it is very difficult to criticize on his own class but it's true that politicians and bureaucracy have ruined India. Before I go to subject, I like to give thanks to Kanchan Banerjee, Vijay Nata, Ujjwalji and their team for organizing such a beautiful events. Sir, आप